Hi there, I'm going to show you how to create a sample of the inseam pocket. So this is one that I've made, and this is what you'll end up with if you're on one of my courses. And you can see I've used a contrast fabric for the pocket bag, but the pocket is put into the seam. So this could be the side seam of any garment, a dress, a jacket, trousers, skirt, and the pocket is just inserted into the seam. And you can use a contrasting fabric for the pocket bag, or you can use the same fabric, or you can use a lighter weight fabric, but it's best not to use anything heavier than the actual garment fabric that you're constructing from. So if you're following one of my courses, I will have given you some pattern pieces to cut out, which would have been on A3 paper. So you'll need to cut out along the bold lines, and the dotted lines indicate where you're going to stitch. So you'll need to cut out two of this long strip piece, which will be the garment front and the garment back, and you'll need to cut out two of the pocket pieces. If you're making a real garment, you'd need 4 of the pocket pieces, because you'd need 2 for the left side and 2 for the right side. So I've cut out my 2 long strips, and I've used a lighter sort of satin fabric to create the pocket bags from. What you'd need to do if you were doing this on a garment is to make sure that you mark exactly where the pocket's going to fit in. So on my pattern, I've just marked here with these 2 markings, and you can just put a tiny little snip into the edge of the fabric to mark where those pockets will then match. So once I've cut out my 2 pocket pieces and the 2 garment pieces, what I'm going to do first is to edge finish all the way around each pocket piece separately, and then I'm also going to edge finish the side seam where the pockets are going to go. You could edge finish all the way around this, as it's going to be a sample piece. I've edge finished my 2 pocket pieces. Now make sure if you've got a right and a wrong side of the fabric that you've got 2 opposite pieces here. So the shiny side could be used as the right side, or the dull side could be, but you can see here that I've got opposite pieces rather than 2 the same, because they're going to go together like that to form the pocket. So once you've edge finished both of those, and if you're overlocking, it's quite difficult to do that perfectly, so you might need to have a bit of practice going around curves first, or just edge finish it using a different method. I've also overlocked the edge here where the pocket's going to go into, and I've done that on both of the garment front and back on that one edge. And the reason that I do all the edge finishing first is that when the pocket's put in, it's a lot more difficult to try and get around the pocket and the side seams easily to do all the edge finishing, especially if you are going to do it using an overlocker. Now if your fabric's quite lightweight and you're worried about the pocket opening gaping, you could always apply some interfacing to this edge just along in the seam allowance, or you could use some twill tape or some sort of ribbon that would just keep that a bit more secure and stable on that edge, to avoid it sort of gaping and opening when you don't want it to. I'm not going to do that on my sample. So the next thing to do, now that I've got these, is I'm going to pin my pocket pieces to the garment front and back. So I'm going to place the fabric garment piece, this is the right side of the fabric facing up that you can see, and then I'm going to use the shiny side of the pocket bags as the right side. So I'm placing those right side to right side, and I'm positioning them between the snips. So there's the snip there, and there's a snip here at the top, and I'm going to position it on there and then pin that in place. making sure that those raw edges, or rather those now finished edges of the fabric, will match. And then I'm going to do the same with the other pocket bag. So shiny side facing down, right sides facing together, placing that between the two snips and pinning that in place. Now on my pattern, I've got 1.5 cm of seam allowance for this sample, but my next step is to just sew the pocket bags to the front and back of the garment, and when I sew the pockets on, I'm going to use just a 1 cm seam allowance, and I'm going to stitch just where the pocket is, all up this edge here, and then all the way up this edge here, and I'm going to use just a 1 cm seam allowance. And the reason for that is so that the pocket sits inside the garment and you don't see it on the outside. So if I show you on my finished sample, you see when I open this pocket up, you can see that there's a little bit of a gap between the edge and where the pocket starts, and this means that you can use a contrasting fabric and it doesn't start to show on that edge when you're wearing the garment. So I'm going to sew this in place using a 1 cm seam allowance. So this has now been stitched in place, 1 cm from the edge, and I've done that on both sides, 1 cm from the edge all the way along. The next thing to do is to press the pockets, and I want to press that, pull the pocket over that way and press this seam here to one side, so pressing the pocket away from the garment and ironing that to one side, and I do that on both of them. So this one is going to be pressed this way, and I'm pressing from the right side and just pressing that seam out and pressing that flat. So now I've done that and I've pressed these really well, I'm going to put the two pieces right sides together. So this piece will go on the top of that piece there. And then what I want to do is to stitch from the top of the garment edge 1.5 cm in, so regular seam allowance, 1.5 cm in from this edge, stitch to about here, pivot the needle and then stitch all the way around the pocket, back to here, pivot again and stitch down. And when you're stitching along here, you're stitching slightly beyond your centimetre here, so you should be 0.5 cm this way, and then pivoting about there and going around and pivoting again here and stitching to the bottom. So I'm going to do that on a normal length stitch using my 1.5 cm of seam allowance. Now you might think, well, where do I stop? Where do I pivot? I'm not sure. So you can mark that if you want to. So on this one I've marked with chalk where I need to pivot, so I've just measured 1.5 cm in and put a chalk mark and then 1.5 cm from the pocket edge and just given myself some guidelines, and the same here so I know where I've got to stitch. So you can pin these together before you sew to make sure they're going to stay together, and you can also put some pins in around the pocket piece to keep those edges together, and then this can be sewn in place along here, 1.5 cm all the way around to the top of the garment edge. This is the one that I've sewn 1.5 cm in from this edge of the garment, stitching along here, then all the way around the pocket piece and then to the top edge of the garment. And then once you've done that, you can then open that seam out. You can press this seam open as far as you can go, and you can press this seam open and then fold that back on itself and then iron along that edge. So I'm going to just use the iron to open up the seam up to there, and then the same from here, opening up the seam up to there, and that will just help me to be able to then fold that back, get that right on the edge, and then I can iron this in place, ironing the pocket flat ironing that in place. And that's my inseam pocket sample finished.